Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about Ripley episode 6. It's called Some Heavy Instrument. So spoilers for the episode. And this really feels like the part of the story where everything's unraveling. But before I get into it, of course, this is a Patreon sponsored review, so thank you to Fletcher for picking Ripley for review. Last episode we had the murder of Freddy. This episode we had the aftermath of that. We've got a new sort of prominent character in Inspector Ravini. It's a very Italian name, which not that that's surprising, but it's just very Italian. And all of the little lies are starting to like get very dangerously close to like just falling apart next to each other. There's a part later on in this episode where Ripley is pretending to be Dickie to the authorities and to most official paper trails. But Marge shows up and he's pretending to be, well, not pretending, but he is Ripley to Marge, but pretending that Dickie's off doing something else. And it's kind of funny how some of his lies from one kind of help him lie to the other person. Where he's like, oh, like, you know, they keep talking to Dickie, the police, about everything that's going on, so he had to get out of the city. But at the same time, one of the suspected victims of whoever's killing someone is also Tom Ripley. Because now there's a trail that someone named Ripley was with Dickie back when the episode when Dickie was murdered, and we had the whole, like, you know, the hotel concierge who was kind of suspicious about giving both passports back. He's on the sort of the paper trail. So it's not just that they find Freddy's body in this episode and start investigating that and start poking little holes in things that Ripley's saying. They also find the boat that Dickie's body was in, not in anymore, of course, but there's blood there. And there's a paper trail for that these two Americans rented the boat, and that leads to the hotel where they were staying. And all of a sudden, this fictional version of Dickie that Ripley's pretending to be is now a suspect in a murder and a missing persons, which makes him look mighty guilty. And the weird thing is that one of the people that he supposedly might have murdered is himself. Which is really funny. So there's a few moments in this episode I laughed, actually. There's kind of a bit of repetition with like the inspector coming to see Ripley and Ripley almost leaving with a suitcase right before. It plays on a lot of the little motifs that the last episode had, which is the sound of the footsteps coming up the stairs and hearing it beyond the door and the worry of who it is coming up to the door. And this episode is just full of that. The phone is constantly ringing, both for just phone calls, but for people coming up from downstairs from the concierge area. And every time it's like a jolt to the system where Ripley hears the phone and he's like, oh god, who is that now? And twice in the episode, it's the inspector coming up to question him about different things. Later on, like right after the inspector leaves towards the end, it's Marge is downstairs and it's like all it would take is Marge talking to the inspector or them both being there at the same time and interacting with Ripley, and the entire thing, the entire house of cards that he has built would come tumbling down. And it leads to this idea of like, what can he do now? Because even if like he kind of successfully gets away with it in the sense that, oh, Dickie's going to be blamed for these, you know, murder and missing persons, but that means that identity's blown, so he can't really just go into a bank and use that name anymore because the authorities are going to be looking for him. So it puts him in this interesting pickle, but there's a lot of fun stuff here. The opening like section of the episode is very much the methodical discovery of Freddy's body. It's this policeman finding the body in the car, calling it in. We get kind of the stages of this where he's even waiting for the guy at the back of the desk who's answering the calls to like even get back from the bathroom to respond to this. They call out the inspector, and it kind of like presents the inspector with this sort of air of like they're all, I don't want to say scared of him in like a sort of bad way, but just in like a sort of like professional way where he's got a little bit of an air of like intimidation because he's taking his job seriously. He's very adamant that they don't touch the crime scene. But one of the paramedics or whoever had to check for a pulse just to officially declare the person dead. And as a result, the car door was opened and they're all just sort of standing there awkwardly like a school teacher's giving them out of trouble and chastising them. And the inspector as a performer, like he is very stern, But there's moments when he's with Ripley where he like lets out this little sly smile, like he's calling bullshit and whatever Ripley's saying. So we have yet another character who just doesn't buy all the shit that Ripley's selling them. So that's the whole thing. This actually leads to one of my favorite shots of the entire show, and I guess my favorite location in the entire show, and that is the morgue that this body is sent to. We see the body arrive and get wheeled down into this area, but when we cut into like the coroner performing the autopsy or whatever, or writing up his notes, this morgue is at the bottom of like this really elaborate, like fancy staircase. And what I mean by this, imagine like a sort of wide staircase, like I guess it's kind of a spiral staircase, but a very wide spiral staircase. And the way that there's a sort of central like bit in the middle that's just open, right? And at the morgue is at the bottom of this, like so you can look down over the edge of the railing at any point and see like the tables, and in this case where the body is. And it's such a surreal place to have a morgue. Like, I don't know if this is based on a real place that actually has a morgue in this location, or if this is just purely a cinematic choice, because it's got a lot of atmosphere, this moment, and this visual. If nothing else, visually, the idea that this body's at the bottom of this spiral just kind of reflects, like, what it represents. This is the tip of the spiral that's leading to Ripley's everything unfolding, or whatever you want to call it. But forget even the meaning, it just looks great. It's a great place. It's such a bizarre place to have a morgue that it just sticks out in a really cool way. And while the show's had a lot of really nice visuals and a lot of great locations, there's a lot of on location stuff from Italy and various locations, this is probably the first time where I felt like a really weird, something that feels more cinematic and unnatural rather than just we're in a cool real place. Now this might be a real place, this might be based on where a real morgue is, I don't know, but it feels surreal. And I think having that in here after everything is not felt that way, like, made it even feel more potent. Like, it really stuck out as like a really interesting place to have a morgue. But anyway, I really like this. The visual was great, looking down at the tables. So yeah, establishes time of death, or they're trying to at the very least. They don't really quite have an answer yet. But the two big scenes, of course, are the inspector going to see Ripley. And something that I had forgotten about from last episode, or not even forgotten about, but just I assumed he would have cleaned it up, is the blood in the bathtub. So we get this great shot as the inspector and he's like uniformed police officer come in, and in the foreground you just see the blood still dripping in the inside of the bathtub, meaning that at any point they could walk over there and see it. And there's lots of little things, like, Ripley was smart enough to hide the suitcase he was about to leave with, because that may look suspicious. But when he's asked for his passport, he notices he's got two passports sitting in the desk, and that's kind of weird if if there's not a good answers to who they both are, and especially if the inspector wants to see both of them, it's probably going to look kind of weird that the other one, I assume, is Ripley's passport, and he hands him the artificial one. He hands him the dicky one with his face on it. So yeah, like, all of these little moments, the fact that the inspector's using the murder weapon as the ashtray, and just little things like that, and like the camera focusing on it in the foreground whilst Ripley's sitting there trying to act casual on the couch, trying to play it cool. But there's a lot of little things here where, obviously, for the first time in the show, even though a lot of characters like Marge, like Freddy, have all clearly not believed what Ripley's saying at times, and they're very suspicious of who he is and what his intentions are, this is actually someone who is a detective, who is an inspector, whose purpose is to weed out the lies and to get to some kind of truth, right? And that sly little smile that he has occasionally, which always seems to come after something we know is a lie, and it kind of implies that he also knows it's a lie. He just has to prove it later on. He has to collect some evidence or whatever. But this character actually, like, calling out the vagueness of some of Ripley's statements and asking for him to clarify it, because when he says, hey, okay, so this Freddy character, he was here yesterday, right? What time did he get here? And Ripley quite casually says, oh, late afternoon, like 4 or 5. And the inspector's like, 4 or 5, and then Ripley picks one. Now, it wouldn't be that suspicious, I think, for him to say, yeah, I'm not really sure, somewhere in there. Might have been like in between. Maybe have been, 4:30, whatever. The problem is, though, is the next two parts of this line of questioning where the inspector asks for a time when Freddy left and also a time that Ripley said he went for a walk. Every single time, Ripley does the same thing where he says 8 or 9, 1 or 2. He keeps giving it a window and not being sure. And it just comes across like he's been intentionally vague the whole time, and the inspector is absolutely picking up on it and like forcing him to nail down specifics. And I also like it just from the perspective of, like, he says, were you here last night? Did you leave the house after Freddy left? And Ripley says no, but then he corrects himself because I assume it occurs to him during that little moment that, hey, someone might have seen me outside. I left the building like 2 or 3 times that night because he had to go back to the body to get the passport and stuff, which ended up being futile because almost immediately the inspector finds the receipt for the car rental in the car, and that leads to the agency that rented the car, which leads to the identification of Freddy, which leads to where he was staying at the hotel, which leads to the address that he'd written down for Ripley, his whereabouts, because we knew he went looking for him. So yeah, all those details are great. This is a show that does a great job of playing with its details and sort of just very methodically going through them one by one. You understand how this inspector found who Freddy was and how it ultimately led him to here. Just like later on, the stuff with the boat and the cop that's dealing with that, seeing in the newspaper that this Mr. Greenleaf has been, questioned about this murder, he's like, oh shit, I need to call this inspector and tell him that we've got that name's popped up again. They've connected that name along with a Tom Ripley to this boat that didn't get returned, but then it get found with blood on it, and it was weighed down with rocks, which is also very suspicious. So that stuff is all just fun to see it all start to come together, because these are all things that have been seeded since like episode 2 or 3. Even down to the fact that when the inspector goes to the hotel where Freddy was staying, it's the big fancy hotel that Ripley went to for like a day and then left because he knew Marge was going to find him. And it's the same concierge, so we recognize him, right? There's a lot of like little faces that pop up in this episode that were in previous parts of the story as various characters are questioning things. And of course, as this is going on, Marge, for one, is concerned because she finds out that Dickie's boat's been sold, and she thinks that's suspicious, that he loves that boat, and questions that heavily. But then, of course, where you see all of these things starting to come together, where you know Marge is going to be more of a problem for Ripley, is when she sees the newspaper about Freddy's death. Had she not seen that, this might not have went the way it did. This might have finally been she kind of accepted that maybe she'd been dumped and that Dickie wasn't coming back, but she sees Freddy turn up dead, and that Dickie's in some way being questioned about it. That's in the newspaper. Which, by the way, they did a little fancy thing where it's in Italian, but there's like a little sort of ripple goes across the newspaper and it turns into English for us to read. Very interesting. I wonder if they did that in different languages for the different, if you pick different subtitle tracks or different audio tracks, will it change that as well for whoever's watching? Probably not. It'll probably just be in the subtitles. But still, fun to think about. So all of this, it just all feels like it's careening, and I think the best example of that is that when the inspector comes back to see Ripley again, and Ripley was about to leave, even though he was told not to, he has to hide the suitcase again, he has to wait for the inspector, he has to play it cool, but he's quite quickly caught off guard when the inspector starts asking about the boat. Now, not that he's completely off guard, because he did see it in the paper that a boat had been found. He knew what it was. He'd seen that already. But the inspector starts asking about it, and I don't think Ripley had any indication that they'd already tracked who had rented the boat and that it was going to lead back to him in some way. So he immediately starts asking these questions about the boat, and he admits taking the boat out. And this is where, to me, the real fun of this episode kicked in, is, well, for one, we return to the joke that when Ripley's pretending to be Dickie but he has to talk about Ripley, he makes it sound like Ripley's a saint, right? Like very quickly he says, "Oh, Ripley's a great guy. Ripley's the best. He brought me my clothes. He brought me my art supplies," and that's true. Ripley did bring those things, and Marge saw him take some of those things, and that was the story. He was taking them to Dickie. But on the other end of it, Ripley's now pretending to be Dickie to the inspector, and now having to talk about Ripley in the third person, and claiming that he's this great guy and whatever. That's entertaining, but this is where it got really fun to me from a conceptual level, because this is where, you realize that Ripley is now considered missing and possibly a second victim. If the assumption is that maybe this Dickie that he's looking at, the inspector's thinking, someone else went missing around you and this guy turned up dead. If you are a killer, you probably killed both. So the idea that he's kind of suspected of his own murder is very fun. It's very playful. And while obviously the inspector's not got all the puzzle pieces yet, he doesn't understand that there's a wild identity theft thing happening here, he still feels really smart. He still feels like he's noticing a lot of the inconsistencies, and we know as the audience what's going on, but watching someone who's smart do the best they can with the information they're gleaming, and he's getting a lot. Like, he's noticing all these little details, he's asking all the right questions, he's getting there, and that's why it's so exciting when he walks past Marge when he's leaving the building, right? He does give Ripley permission to leave and just, give me a number for the hotel you're staying at, but you can leave, like, I'll allow it. Now, he was already planned to go anyway, but now he's got permission, which makes me think the inspector's got a plan. It makes me think that he's got him maybe being watched. He's concocted some sort of thing to catch him out in a lie, maybe. It feels like it's a strategic play by the inspector more than anything. But of course, Ripley has to go and deal with Marge. So he has to change his wardrobe. He has to put on his own jacket. He has to take off the ring. And awkwardly has to keep saying that he doesn't know where Dickie is. He doesn't know when he'll be back. But he's like, you had to get out of the city because of all this Freddy business. And the entire time, Marge is just staring daggers at him. It's these moments where the performances really make a lot of this thing. I mean, obviously, Andrew Scott's been, like, carrying so much of this with his nervousness, his little moments of, like, being scared. And so much is, like, sort of steamrolling, like it's snowballing. I mean to say, it's snowballing so much in this back half of the episode between the inspector almost getting to leave and then Marge calling, and I didn't even mention the other guy calling. There was a guy who was staying with Freddy at the hotel who calls thinking it is Dickie, but obviously Tom can't go meet him because this guy actually knows Dickie, so he has to just pretend that he's going to go meet him on the phone. So this is like there's fires breaking out all over the place for Ripley to put out. And it feels like he's spiraling. It honestly got to the point where, as the inspector was leaving and we got the phone rang again and it was Marge downstairs, where I genuinely thought, how is he going to even get out of this? I actually thought this, like, obviously I know there's 2 more episodes, but I'm like, how does he get out of this? I didn't know. And it just, he just got lucky, basically. That's all it comes down to. He got lucky that they didn't all... Like, she didn't start talking to him. She did say she talked to the police, but clearly I don't think she's talked to the inspector. But I can see a scene where she does go to talk to the inspector. Not that she's still in Rome. She does get on a train by the end of the episode. And, Tom makes sure she gets on the train and waves her goodbye. He's making sure she's out of there. But I wouldn't be surprised, though, if she just... comes straight back or something, or maybe something propels that in the next episode. But so Ripley leaves. He gets on the boat to where he's going. I thought he was going to go to somewhere different, different than the place that he said he was going to go, so he could go on the run. So I don't know what he's got planned right now, and I don't know, like, what he's possibly going to concoct to try and cover his tracks or deal with the mountain of lies that are starting to really feel the strain of all living on top of one another. Like, there's a lot going on there, and I don't know what he's going to do with that. It does feel like he's going to have to abandon this identity by the end of the show. I actually only just found out that there's 6 books in this series that it's based on, and I presume this is only just based on the first book. So that would lead me to believe that he is not just going to like get caught at the end of the season, and there's possibilities that there could be a season 2. I assumed this was a limited series, but apparently the showrunner and Andrew Scott are both game for one if Netflix will let them do it. So that does change my expectations a little bit as to how this might end, because I kind of went into this thinking it was just a complete one and done limited show, but that might not be the case. And even if it is end up only being one season, that there are, the fact that there's potential for more stories means that it can end certain ways, I would assume. So as for this, it's a beautiful shot episode, as they've all been pretty much. I think this one I really liked because so much of it was like maybe some of the most tense scenes of Ripley having to bullshit his way through conversations, but the stakes are getting higher and higher now, so they're really, really ringing true. And then, just like I say, the weird location for the morgue was great. I didn't even mention the little dream sequence where, like, soaking wet, Dickie comes up and sits down next to him near the start of the episode. I really like that. Just for the details again, because something as simple as Dickie's fingers being pruned was just a great touch. It was like, oh, it really sold the idea that he's been in water for a long time. He's not just dripping wet, he's actually been in the water for a significant amount of time. So, that's fun. Like, and I don't know, like, I don't know if they have a way to fake that with like makeup or something, or is it just a case of, whether it's the actor or it's like a hand double, but are they just putting their hands in water for like 20 minutes and that's just how you do it. You just have to do it for real. There's no fake it. There's no ways around it. I don't know, but it's one of the little things that went through my mind as it came up. But yeah, it really does feel like everything's crumbling. Like, I don't see how he can go back to Rome at this point. Like, there's almost a little bit in the middle where he tries to like reassure himself because he talks to the landlady, and she like basically talks to him about how she didn't really like Freddy. Oh, this is shocking that he's turned up dead. And Dickie's like, yeah, he was kind of mean to me as well. And he's almost feeling relief because someone's agreeing with them, and it's almost like he's reassured that someone's just buying into what he's saying. But she's the only character who's buying into what he's saying. And she might think twice about the blood that she found, because that was the little ending at the end of last episode. And it didn't end up being like a huge deal because she just kind of assumed that the cat had killed a mouse or something and just kind of like wipes it away, goes about her business. It's a good little moment though for Ripley because he sees it and almost as a panic attack. But yeah, so the cat ended up being the alibi in a weird way for that. So no, yeah, solid episode. Everything feel like I was a little bit worried that after last episode, because last episode was a lot like episode 3 and it was this really great focus thing. I think this one did not lose any momentum. If anything, it just felt more ramped up because it really does feel like everything's starting to pay off, and it feels like it's not quite the exact same, but it's almost got a little bit of that Uncut Gems style of writing where the character in that movie spinning all these plates with all these gambling like habits and all the debt that he owes. And he can't keep doing it. Eventually it's going to come and get him and everything's going to come crumbling down. And it's very tense and, just anxiety ridden because of that. This is kind of like that in a lot of ways, just with, murder and like identity theft, where all of these lies, everything he's doing to kind of skirt away from people is all piling up. And it's starting to get really riveting watching how close he is to just being completely caught. And everyone just proving that he's a complete liar and figuring out who he is and what he's doing. So, yeah, I'm excited for the next episode. I'm excited because we've got 2 episodes left. We'll see how the season wraps up. But this was another strong one. It's easy to say I think episode 3 and 5 are the 2 best episodes. Maybe. Oh, this might actually be better than the last episode, and that's saying something. But I do think this is at least in the top 3 of the episodes so far. Yeah, and scene of the week for me has to just be the morgue. Not because like there's definitely better scenes from a writing perspective where more like exciting stuff is happening plot wise, but I just love the location and that shot looking down the stairwell so much that's my pick. So that's what I'm going for. But yeah, that is my thoughts on Ripley episode 6. Let me know what you thought of this episode in the comments. You can of course support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV and help keep it all coming. That's how I can do this as much as I can, both on MailFuzz TV and on the MailFuzz movie channel where all the movie podcasts live. So go check out those or check out other TV reviews if you haven't. But that is me. So thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?